Welcome to the Wildflowers in the Sky YouTube channel. My name is Marissa Bing, and I am an astrologer, a teacher, and a forever student of topics that include manifestation, cosmology, philosophy, depth psychology, and all things spiritual. I am brimming with passion and focus on helping you uncover the depths of astrology, and I am determined to help you see your life through a lens that is both empowering and purposeful. If you are looking to expand your knowledge of astrology or develop new perspectives through which you can just view your life through, or just simply be provided with thought-provoking material, then look no further. This YouTube channel has one goal, and that goal is to encourage positive and powerful shifts. Shifts in self-understanding, shifts in understanding others, and shifts in understanding this world. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. Happy Virgo season. I am very excited to share this episode. You might recall that I promised to whip up this episode as fast as I could, and I genuinely did try. As you know, I'm in a million courses, and then on top of that, I had to add in 9 units at a community college because I am trying to increase my GPA. If you don't already know, I'm really trying to get into CIIS's Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program. Completely forgot the name just now. And only like 20 students get selected per year, or per semester. So I'm just trying to increase my chances and cross my fingers here. Also, I did actually record this episode, and I was like midway of editing it, and I was like, man, this video sucks. So I had to redo it, and the reason it sucked is just because I was like so hot on the day that I was recording it. It was like 100 degrees. And I was miserable, and it was obvious I was miserable. It was obvious I was like struggling, and so the message was just coming out jumbled. So anyways, here we are today, and we are focused on Virgo. And Virgo is one of my favorite signs. I find this sign so confusing, and not confusing like someone teach me about Virgo because I just don't get it compared to Taurus and Capricorn, but like in this way of what you choose to do with your life confuses me. Like, that's what I mean when I say the sign confuses me. Not that I can't understand the sign, but, you know, a Virgo in front of me and the way they choose to operate their life and the drives within them, it just confuses me. We just would do things totally different. And I know they feel the same way towards me, and there's a variety of reasons for why I feel this way. But also, if you look at the signs by aspect, you know, Virgo and Aries create what's called a quincunx, and a quincunx is just not a very comfortable aspect. So there's like lack of common ground, and therefore I love this sign. I love things that confuse me. I love things that challenge me, that startle me, that surprise me, and anything that piques my interest that I don't get. It's kind of like a fun challenge to try to figure it out. So I'm all about them, and not to mention that all of my family are Virgo sun or Virgo rising, and seriously, like in my immediate family, perhaps aside from one person, everyone is Virgo sun or Virgo rising except for me. And not all of them, but a lot of the very impactful teachers or mentors in my life have always been Virgo sun or Virgo rising. So I'm just always surrounded by this energy, and I'm genuinely a fan. Okay, so there are a lot of quotes and references in this episode, and this is because of a few reasons that include the fact that I'm kind of introducing a different angle of perspective around Virgo, and for some people this might be a completely different look or take at Virgo than what is usually read on pop astrology websites or commercialized descriptions and interpretations. And I know, personally for me, when I'm met with information that differs from what I've read or studied, I'm kind of critical and full of questions. So to calm down any worries or skepticism, read the info I'm about to provide. I have equipped myself with an arsenal of information to ensure that I'm not just throwing random opinions at you, but instead providing actual educated content influenced or directly supplied by universally recognized astrologers. That said, I want to emphasize that this episode certainly isn't covering every little thing about Virgo, but it is jam-packed with information to introduce a different perspective and approach to Virgo, and also to serve as an introduction to the Virgo archetype. So, I also want to make sure I say that, as a friendly disclaimer, this episode is zeroing in on the Virgo archetype, and this is not your personal version of Virgo, you as an individual who is a Virgo. This is not to describe you, this is to describe the Virgo archetype. Your version of Virgo is affected by the planets and signs that riddle your own chart, and thus you might differ from this description. Say, for example, you have a ton of fire in your chart, then your version of Virgo is definitely going to be different. So I just want to throw that out there. Okay, to get started, let's tap into the essence of Virgo with some quotes about this sign. Stephen Forrest, in his book The Inner Sky, writes, "The poor virgin is seen as a boring sign, given to pettiness and idiosyncrasies. In truth, there is no sign more exciting. Why? Because there is no sign more eager to grow. Her perfectionism pressures her to change, and her pragmatic realism gives her the means to do it. If this were all there were to Virgo's strategy, she would be the most selfish of the signs. Everything would revolve around me, my growth, my hang-ups. Egoism need not be arrogant. Compulsive personal analysis bestows upon the self a distortedly central position in the universe, just as certainly as any messiah complex. Virgo does not succumb to that trap. There is a second dimension to her personality, one that serves to balance her seriousness and self-absorption. This is a sign of the servant." Darby Costello, in her book Earth and Air, writes, "Virgo is about intricacy. It is the intricacy and subtlety of nature. It is the subtle interweave of species with the other, and of each species with its local and particular environment. It is the intricacy of the flora and the fauna of each environment, and the insects and fish and animals that are part of that environment. It is the infinite usefulness of nature, with its remedies, its poisons, and its antidotes. It is the infinite permutations of nature, with its intricate order of eat and be eaten, and use and be used. It is a tiny detail of the smallest flower under the moss, under the tree, under the fern, which none of us ever sees, exquisite in its delicate shape, and perfectly woven into the chain of being in that particular wood, as is the tallest redwood in California. It is the very delicate and yet incredibly hardy interconnection of all life. Planets in Virgo are nervous and shy of exposure. They stand behind their work, not in front of it. They are attuned to the delicacy of the balancing act that goes into keeping anything going." She continues with, "Virgo is also the cup of tea you bring your aunt when she has come home from town tired and irritable. It is the polish you put on the underside of the table so that the wood can be fed from both sides, whether it is seen or not. It is the accounts he keeps so that the incoming and outgoings tally, so that the harvest can feed the community. It is the endless tasks that have to do with maintaining the rhythms and cycles of the daily life." And lastly, Frank Clifford, in his book Getting to the Heart of Your Chart, remarks, "Virgo is born to be the craftswoman, specialist, and the scrupulous selector. A natural harvester, she separates the wheat from the chaff, and her interest lies in getting to the heart of the matter and of being a service to the greater whole. Relishing the discovery of any detail that is useful and essential, Virgo analyzes to create systematic order and make the world a better place. The most controlling and idiosyncratic of the signs, she follows the pomp and ceremony of Leo by putting the things back into sequence and ensuring they function economically, all without creating a noticeable fuss. Her gifts of precision and restoration are indispensable." You'll notice that none of these descriptions paint the picture that we often find of the nitpicky, clean freak who is incredibly OCD and mega hard, cold, heartless, judgy, etc. Okay, so now let's go ahead and dive into the building blocks of this sign, beginning with the Virgoic foundations. We are turning our attention to the earth element. Virgo is an earth sign. Earth signs are very focused on the material and physical world. They approach the world solely through their senses, what they can see, smell, touch, taste, and hear, interacting with what stands materially before them that they can interact with on a physical way. They are very practical and realistic in the tangible sort of sense, with attention on the real world. They are strongly driven by security in the physical and material sense. So not so much geared towards emotional security as would a water sign, but physical security. So, homes, structures, money, transportation, etc. They certainly prefer the more concrete and more tangible. Catherine Homaker-Zondag, who I will refer to as KHZ from this point forward, tells us in her book Psychological Astrology, for the earth types, the material world and the palpable reality takes pride in place. It is the world of forms discerned by the physical sense organs and grasped by the practical intellect in which someone of this type feels most at home and on which he reposes his trust. Earth is practical, solid, reliable. Therefore, its subjects are noted for such qualities as perseverance, not to say obstinacy, industry, patience, caution, and control. Just as Earth is passive and receptive, so someone of the Earth type can do nothing without being motivated and inspired by others, who can both incite him to action and help him to assimilate his impressions. He can also have a strong inclination to conform to matter and to be better rooted in material possessions. Often a person of this type identifies himself with his possessions, or with the part the world expects him to play, or with the task it gives him to fulfill. And I want to quickly address something that KHC mentions. She touches on that Virgo is receptive and passive. She is saying this because Virgo is a yin sign, and yin signs are naturally passive and receptive. They are not likely to dynamically charge forward in a situation and go and get, like the yang signs are. They are more often the recipients of the effects as initiated by the yang signs. So the yang signs, they go out and they get, but the yin signs, they receive and they allow, they kind of sit back, they're a bit more passive. And Virgo is a yin sign. Bringing in Carl Jung's personality types, we learn that Virgo, as an earth sign, is associated with the personality type perspective. KHC teaches that earth types and perceptive types both share a sensorial attachment to objects. Sensorial, so senses, the five senses, attachment to objects. She says, for the perceptive type, the sense organs are always their most important means of making contact between the internal and the external world. Perception is immediately given and is therefore not subject to the laws of reason, as are the conscious functions of thinking and feeling. In her book, she also cites Carl Jung explaining, there is no other human type that equals the extrovert perceptive type as far as realism is concerned. His objective sense for fact is unusually well developed. The things he experiences sometimes hardly merit the name of experience. If we were to condense what we know, we'd understand that Virgo is Earth, and Earth is highly sensual, practical, realistic, security-driven, and materially focused. And please do note that when I say material focused or materially focused, I don't mean that they are superficial and only care about the material. I'm indicating that their approach is by means of what is materially crossing path with their senses. Some people are emotionally focused and approach things by how the situation feels or how something feels. Earth types are materially focused and approach according to their senses and how they can interact with it on a physical level. They are focused on what is materially before them in the most realistic sense. Of the three modalities, Virgo is a mutable sign. Mutable signs, which are Sagittarius, Gemini, Pisces, and Virgo, they tend to be versatile, changeable, adaptable, capable of seeing various perspectives, and sometimes a little scattered. In consideration of the psychology of a mutable sign, KHZ teaches that mutable signs are those who flow both from the inwardly focused, like the subconscious and the conscious and the emotions and all that is tucked down within there, to the externally focused. So they're constantly fluctuating back and forth. And she says, its strength, mutable signs' strength, lies in the ability to switch from one mode to the other, from the internal to the external. And if you watched the last Leo video, we kind of explored a little bit more of like the internal, because Leo is a fixed sign, which is a very internal process. As we learned from KHC, mutable signs seek fresh experiences, and if they can't get their hands on fresh experiences, then they will seek encounters that stimulate their mind so that it is as if they had a fresh experience, or it provides a fresh experience because their mind is so stimulated. and they're going down some new avenue or some new adventure or some new path. And overall, fresh experiences are pretty exciting encounters. But we have to consider that we're looking at Virgo, and Virgo is an earth sign, and if we remember, earth signs strive for security. Earth signs aren't necessarily ones who will jump at an impulse and dive head deep into some unplanned adventure. Virgo isn't Sagittarius, the fire mutable sign, and they would never ever just jump into a car for a road trip on an hour's notice with no money in the bank. Virgo would be appalled by that idea. So when we're discussing exciting encounters or fresh experiences, I think it's safe to assume that Virgo will likely opt out of any exciting encounters that require adrenaline pumping adventure, right? They're going to probably opt for the fresh experiences that stimulate their mind and allows for them to have like a modified kind of adventure. And I say modified in a more subjective way, right? My definition of an adventure, to me, I might be like, that's a modified form of it. But maybe to them, it's not a modified form, right? To them, when they look at my adventures, they're like, you're wild. That's not, that's not cool. So, when I say modified, that's very subjective thinking. But they would have their own kind of adventure, probably opting for the more mentally stimulating kind of approach, inciting that fresh experience. And that said, Virgo does have to be careful because it is far too easy for Virgo to get trapped in an inhibiting situation simply due to fear of the newer or unknown adventures. Virgo is a mutable sign and thus has an inner craving to achieve these fresh experiences. And it's very important that Virgo not suppress this inner need simply due to an overwhelming concern of safety. And again, we are looking at the Virgo archetype. So if you're a Virgo and mega disagreeing right now, you likely have like fire in your chart or maybe even air in your chart, and that would definitely affect your Virgoic approach. KHC continues saying, the mutable cross has a need to build bridges, both between the conscious and the unconscious, between situations and people. As you will see, the bridge building can be seen inside or outside the individual, but in any case, it does introduce a note of service into the Virgo makeup. Also, because the Virgo mind tends to concentrate on form, people born under the sign often like to save the day to preserve the shape of things. Virgo is a sign that is mutable and ruled by Mercury, and thus building bridges or synthesizing are certainly part of Virgo's traits. Virgo also shares the service axis with its opposite sign, Pisces, and though they share this axis, they are certainly approaching the word service with a different interpretation and meaning. So let's pause here and just simplify really quickly and blend what we have learned about Virgo so far, being the fact that it is Earth and it is mutable. Because we know that Virgo is Earth and has more of a physical approach, and because we understand that Virgo is mutable and can understand its desire to build bridges and connect, it makes sense to consider that Virgo comes to terms with things or understands things by having or using a hands-on approach and then taking things apart and separating them into pieces and then synthesizing and integrating them in the most practical way, ensuring that the resulting product or project serves for some practical purpose, or at the very least, it can be of use. KHC says, in every situation, Virgo tries to serve the world, and even more to serve themselves by reconciling opposites, fostering understanding between others to solve difficulties. As Liz Green puts it, Virgos are here to order, classify, and synthesize. So let's take a minute to acknowledge the elephant in the room and just call out all of the meme-worthy descriptions constantly jabbed at Virgo. Virgos are neat freaks, Virgos are perfectionists, Virgos are super cold and without feelings, Virgos are so judgmental. And I'll be honest, can a Virgo have these traits? Absolutely. Are these traits within the Virgo archetype? Sure. Do these traits define Virgo? No freaking way. Do the sign archetypes hold these characteristics within them? Totally. Is it the key characteristic that the sign is walking around with? Definitely not, or at least in the developed people, right? I think what we have to become aware of is that Virgo has this internal loud speaker that is constantly calling out its own inadequacies. So they're already aware of possible characteristics or potentials within them that are relatively similar to being judgy or cold or OCD, etc. And so when they're hearing others say it, or astrologers say it, or they're just reading about it, they're so self-aware that they own up to it, and they just bow down to it, and they just accept it as who they are. It's kind of like if one person calls out the one thing about you that you're insecure about, suddenly nothing else matters, and you're like, man, that insecurity is my definition of who I am, right? It's a very similar kind of construct that's occurring, I think, for a lot of Virgos. So they're just saying, yeah, that's who I am. That's exactly like what's going on. Sorry, this lighting is like so weird. Okay. But they're just like, they're just bowing down to these definitions because they are aware that they relate to them in some kind of way. And then on the other side, you have Virgos who are also very self-aware, who are like, that's not who I am. I know that's not who I am. And they're just super against astrology because they're hearing all these things about themselves that they're like, that doesn't define me. Why are you saying that? So now that we've acknowledged some of the more ridiculous statements claiming Virgo, let's go ahead and just scrape all that knowledge out that we found online, and let's start with a brand new clean slate. As Liz Green says, and this is a great one, to begin with, we can throw away everybody's favorite image of the eternal ashtray emptier and furniture duster. The neat, orderly, tidy soul with the perfectly balanced bank account and the immaculate kitchen is a picture which sends most Virgos into fits of cynical laughter. For some rather elusive reasons which might just lie, as so much astrological misunderstanding does, in the attempt during medieval times to Christianize or make moral a symbolic system that is far older and more inclusive than Christianity, Virgo is sadly misinterpreted. And I just find that last part so exciting. And as so much astrological misunderstanding does, in the attempt during the medieval times to Christianize or make a more symbolic system that is far older and more inclusive than Christianity, Virgo is sadly misinterpreted. With this information, already we can see that our general understanding of Virgo is a bit of a superficial one. The original picture of Virgo taken and contorted to fit some sort of socially constructive image that satisfies a religion, Christianity. And let's be honest, the image of Virgo, the Virgin, has in some way become synonymous with the Mother Mary. Considering the Virgo symbol is the Virgin, what does the symbol actually mean or represent, if not the Mother Mary? If not the Virgin in the sense of how today's world views the Virgin, what was this representative of? And we have a few images that I think are very powerful and can shed much more insight into the original energy of Virgo. To start off, we must understand that prior to Christianity, Virgo was not associated with traits like virginal or prudish or inhibited, as Liz Green tells us. Let's go back to what the word virgin once meant. It had, in fact, nothing to do with sexual virginity, but simply meant intact, self-contained. The great mythical figure that stands behind Virgo is the great goddess, the Magna Mater, and she was no virgin. In fact, she is often portrayed in myth as the great harlot, the fecund one. But she is Virgo in the sense that she is self-possessed, her own person. In early mythology from which we inherit the figure of the virgin goddess, before the Hellene invasion from the north into the agriculture civilizations of Aegon in around 2000 BC, the goddess did not owe her powers or her status to divine husbands as we see in later mythology. She rode alone, self-contained, husbandless, yet offering her femininity freely as she chose. She was the consort of all life. This is a clue to the deepest meaning of Virgo. A self-possessed psyche, the person who integrated within himself and can therefore give freely because he need not fear losing himself in another. He can choose life's experiences from his own place of completeness, rather than because his need for finding himself in another drives him into relationships or situations which destroy him or will him. Virgo is the last of the first half of the zodiac, the cycle of the individual development, which we mentioned earlier. This means that Virgo, in its deepest senses, is about the real synthesis and integration of the individual, the refinement and the ordering of all experiences which has come from the first 5 signs. Certainly a powerful image. Just look at the flavor of this picture that Liz Green has painted for us. This independent, self-contained, fully integrated within the self, possessed psyche, and so much more. In fact, Virgo is compared to a lot of incredible and powerful and intellectual entities. Darby Costello compares Virgo to the Egyptian god Thoth. She says, "It was he who brought agriculture and art and science, human culture, to the kingdom while his lord Osiris was away." She also compares, and I don't believe it's just her, I think there's a few others, many others, who at least associate the goddess Demeter with Virgo. And Darby Costello comments that Virgo has to do with cultivation in all of its senses. Demeter, goddess of the grain, who rules over all planting and sowing, is a powerful figure in Virgo's field. And I think what's really key here is this picture of integration and cultivation. I'm not sure if it's showing itself to you, but really what we're dialing in on is Virgo's purpose of self-completion. It's starting to make more sense for why they are instilled with this purpose of service. As it's been mentioned a couple of times now by Stephen Forrest and KHC, I really want to point out why Virgo's purpose is first and foremost self-completion and self-development. Not only are we capable of serving the best when we are at our best, but also we can't pour from an empty cup. However, many people who strive to serve others are often coming from an incomplete place, and this is especially true for Virgo. The reasoning for this is because working on the self can suck. It is not easy, it's difficult, it's taxing, it's messy. It requires confrontation with the self, looking at the more mucky parts of ourselves, the parts of ourselves that we want to push down and ignore and not look at and not have to deal with. It's chaotic. It's so chaotic, and chaos intimidates Virgo because they see it everywhere already. And truly, it's also so much easier to focus on other people's issues. It's so much easier to help others. And the way Virgo sees it is, I'll be fine. I can take it. The world needs my help though. Not to mention that mutable signs, and remember Virgo is a mutable sign, when mutable signs are in times of stress, they often do their best and come to insights or clear answers or resolutions or solutions when they busy themselves with tasks that require them to focus not on the problem, but on whatever busy task they have assigned themselves. So though distracting the self can be beneficial to one extent because that is their approach to solving problems, many Virgos can get caught up in focusing on it so much to a point that's harmful, right? It's one thing to distract yourself with a busy task. You just get your mind off the problem. Now, when you're done with your busy task, suddenly you can go back to the problem and boom, answer. But it's another thing to just constantly be running from it, from busy task to busy task to busy task, getting so absorbed in other people's problems, and that way you don't even have to focus on yourself. That could be more of a problematic thing there. I mean, of course, right? If any of us, doesn't matter your sign, if we ignore our problems, obviously there's going to be trouble there at the end. A Virgo who has achieved total self-integration and wholesome completion within the self, that is a Virgo that is so powerful and so capable of creating such incredible impacts, helping so many and providing the cultivation that others need. In truth, however, Virgo has this innate ability to discern the inner workings of things. They can, for example, look at a machine or look at a computer and immediately just know specifically what random small part is not working. They have this gift in which their mind intuitively highlights errors or discrepancies or things that are broken and that need correction or repurification. And this intuitive highlighter, it doesn't just apply to the external world. Remember, they have this internal loudspeaker and their intuitive mind is highlighting themselves, marking themselves up on the areas that they have to tackle at some point. And it's just easier for them to focus on the external than to go inward, because when they go inward, they're facing similar to what the fixed signs face, which is that deep wave of the unconscious and deep wave of the subconscious and deep wave of the inescapable muckiness of the internal world. And it's chaotic and it's not easy. So it does make sense why they'd rather focus externally, but it's important to note that their intuitive highlighter is not just marking you and everyone around you, it's marking themselves as well. And before we get really carried away, I really want to dive into Mercury as Virgo's ruler. Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo, and both signs are focused on information. But where Gemini loves to gather all the little bits of information and go wherever its curious nose goes, Virgo only gathers that which is useful and then organizes that according to the classifications that they set. They will grab all of Gemini's random ass facts and they will put them in nice little categories, naming those categories and putting together some sort of picture. We have to keep in mind that Virgo is Earth, and being a practical mind, they only pursue what practically makes sense on a tangible level. And I love exploring Mercury with Virgo because I think it shows us a much more playful side of Virgo that we don't usually get to see, or that Virgo never receives credit for. So, Mercury was a sneaky one. In myth, he rules thieves and liars, business transactions, commerce. He is cunning and a snarky son of a bitch, one who loves to play tricks and has this intense and witty sense of humor. And honestly, Virgo, it does not run far from this. Everyone's image of Virgo, if they don't really know Virgo, is this like, I'm just this quiet, meek little person in the corner. Do not ever underestimate a Virgo. Do not ever underestimate them. They are so cunning and they are very smart. And they are just as detailed and thorough as Scorpio gets credit for. Actually, Tony Howard made a comment once where he commented that Virgos are just as investigative, you could say. And we remember that Virgo is Earth, and Earth strives for material and physical security. As such, Liz Green argues that no Virgo would automatically choose or even opt to sit openly where a king sits. This is why it is a rare day to find a Virgo who sits on a throne, unless of course they have Aries or Leo or Capricorn in their chart. The reason is because sitting on the throne is a dangerous thing. Shots are always fired at the person who is sitting on the throne. Thus, it's not a safe place. But Virgo already figured that out, and Virgo has figured out a workaround. And they know that the real spot of power is behind the throne. And it's the most secure and safe because there's not going to be any shots fired their direction. And also, they are aware that the person behind the throne, the advisor, the counselor, is actually the one who's calling the shots and who's making the decision and who's creating that influence. So they opt not for the throne. They find it foolish, but they instead choose to be behind the throne. Mercury is also Hermes, who is a very talented and smart little individual. He created the first lyre, and here is a story of that moment that really explores not only the cunning side, but the practical mind that most certainly Virgo has inherited. There is a story of Hermes speaking to a turtle. He was shocked that the turtle would opt to live in a tiny shell, limiting the turtle's ability to grow large and big. Hermes was born in a cave and was working to convince this turtle that its life could be transformed if it just left its shell. Hermes wanted to swap with the turtle. He could get the turtle's shell, and the turtle would get this huge cavern that they were both in. Arguing a very practical argument and promising that the turtle's life would be transformed if he just gave in, the turtle finally agreed. Hermes pulls the turtle right out, naturally killing the turtle in the process, and true to his word, transformed the turtle into something greater, the first lyre, an instrument that would entice and manipulate other gods and mortals alike. To Hermes, however, he didn't see anything wrong with what he did, and his intentions were purely neutral. His intention wasn't to kill or destroy the turtle or hurt the turtle. He was just of such practical mind that killing the turtle was just a byproduct of creating this new musical instrument. To Hermes, the turtle was living a mundane life, very practical, very neutral, also very cold and heartless at that same time, right? There's no feeling there, there's no emotional connection. And it's important to note that Hermes is not the earth element. Mercury is a planet, and the planets are not of any elements. But being the ruler of Virgo, Mercury/Hermes does have various stories that align with more practical approaches. And sometimes that practical and rational approach can lead to some cold conclusions, as we saw with Hermes and this turtle. And also, as a side note, I also think that in this story we can also see the crafty part of Virgo with his love and talent for the lyre, this random musical gift he has and that he's so good at. and it's representative of Mercury's creation and talent. And Virgos are so known for being craftspeople. They often have a craft that they are stellar at. Mercury is also known for speed, for the ability to communicate and translate anything, the only one who could travel between the gods, the underworlds, and the mortals. Bridging a road of connection and relation that never existed before, he was the messenger, very sharp and quick and rational. So clearly Virgo inherited various mercurial qualities. And hopefully we can see Mercury's relation with Virgo in its ability to classify, create order, and synthesize. But what does it mean to synthesize? Liz Green argues that this word offers a much clearer picture of Virgo than the word perfectionism does. She explains that synthesis means finding compatible things or ideas or aspects of life which most people find mutually exclusive. Virgo's compulsion and gift both lie in this area of synthesis. Everything must be fitted together and made to a blend. That means finding out where everything fits by naming it, learning about it, categorizing it, and classifying it. Let's really break this down. Virgo has an innate ability to discern what needs fixing and an innate ability to create order, to classify, and to synthesize. Think of this on an external level. A person who is always creating order, always organizing, always classifying, naming things and putting them where they belong, that's a person who fits the bill of clean or organized. So, okay, we can see why Virgo gets this name for being clean or neat. But in truth, just because Virgo has these abilities does not mean that Virgo will opt to use them around the house or everywhere they go. Or at the very least, Virgo will not use them in the way that we expect. Many a Virgo who live in a mess, but to them, there's absolute order where everything is placed. Other Virgos, though, will live in immaculate households, but don't you dare look in their car or in their closet or on their desk. Not to mention, some Virgos are externally focused and other Virgos are internally focused. Externally focused, and this is something I've learned from Liz Green, externally focused Virgos can apply these abilities to their possessions in a manner that reflects what society considers clean. Maybe they focus on a closet, maybe they focus on their whole house, maybe they focus on a room, maybe they focus on their desk, maybe they focus on just their shoes, right? They might apply this needing to order, needing to classify, needing to synthesize, whatever. Internally focused Virgos will apply these abilities to their internal world, their psyche, their subconscious, their conscious, their emotions, their memories, etc. But how does a Virgo know when or where to use these innate abilities? And how does a Virgo define whether they're going to clean their kitchen or whether they need to focus on their closet, whether they need to create order with their emotions or their memories? Liz Green explains that Virgo's natural approach to any and all is entirely based on two questions. 1, how can I synthesize this? 2, how could this be of use? She argues that if Virgo cannot answer one or both of these questions, then Virgo is out. They just move on. And to be able to answer these questions, Virgo would need to know how to discriminate. Virgo's main driver is its ability to discriminate. If Virgo is constantly seeking to create order in a world full of chaos, there is much to be done. Remember that intuitive highlighter that we talked about previously with Virgo? Imagine where everywhere you go, you have this keen ability to see all these marks, all these little markings, these highlighted marks, calling attention your way because it needs you. It needs help, cultivation, order, synthesization. Everywhere you look, there's a mark. That's so overwhelming. Everywhere you look is something that you're like, that needs fixing, that needs correction. And if we were to truly put things into perspective, let's think of a story. Imagine you're in a space where there are no telephones or cars, and all the people around you suddenly just fall ill. And in one quick glance, somehow you are able to tell exactly what made them ill. And miraculously, you have an idea for how to fix their ailments, which all of their illnesses seem to be different from one another. You just kind of have an idea of how you can approach it. But how do you decide who you're going to help first, or even whether you should help? And how do you prioritize that situation? It's very overwhelming. You see all these people, you're like, I'm pretty sure I know what to do, but who do you choose first to help? And how do you decide that? Virgo's ability to discriminate is necessary. Virgo's gift is discrimination. And Virgo gets a ton of shit for it. But truly, it's their ability to discriminate that allows for them to know what they can handle, what they can't handle. And when I say discriminate, I'm talking about the ability to know the difference between one thing and another. And this gift allows for Virgo to make educated and practical decisions that are in Virgo's best interest. So again, let's condense. Virgo approaches a situation. Virgo asks the two questions, how can I synthesize and how can this be of use practically? Virgo analyzes and discriminates a situation. Virgo makes a call, providing no explanation or reasoning or justification. And honestly, this is where Virgo can get its name for being cold or heartless, without feelings or judgmental. But this brain power happens usually in just the span of a second. They're not like sitting there analyzing, okay, like, should I do this? Should I not do this? Usually their mind it decides pretty quickly because they know what they're capable of. They know what they can offer. They know what's already on their plate. They know what is already prioritized, and it's just such an instinctive process for them. And perhaps Virgo cannot articulate where they're coming from. Perhaps Virgo assumes you just understand where they're coming from, but truly, like, unless you ask, they are not always going to explain why they brushed you aside. I think it's also important that we take a moment here to really consider the weight that fills Virgo's shoes. Virgos have such a strong desire to help others and to be of use. It fulfills them to be of use, of practical, substantial use. But in order to do this practically and efficiently, they have to set their sights on the correct situations, circumstances, people, and things. They have to set boundaries of what they help, who they help, where they help. And with such a strong desire of helping, imagine the toll of knowing you cannot. Maybe it can't be prioritized. Maybe there is awareness that you're just not the right one who can take it, or maybe it didn't answer one of those questions for you. Maybe it's just something that's not necessarily computing that you should get involved in. Whatever it is, Virgo makes a call and they have to stick with it. And if you're aware that you're needed and to just be like, I can't help you, moving on, right? It's just so much weight in the shoes, especially if you have that inner drive to want to help. And I also, again, I just want to make sure I call out that when we're saying the word discriminate here for Virgo, which is actually a very popular term to align with Virgo, obviously we are not referring to the definition that implies unjust or unfairness to others or anything like that. Okay, so an unbalanced Virgo can obviously go different directions with their extremities. Virgo can extend itself to qualities that are more controlling and obsessive. As a result, they might maintain a tighter grip, and anxiety can ensue, and they can either get stuck in these lost fevers of just like directionless, or they can go into loops of I told you so syndrome. So these are some of the unfortunate traps that can happen for a Virgo that is unbalanced. And this is why it is so important that Virgo practice a healthy balance of helping others while still instilling boundaries. If we don't have boundaries, then we get in this lost, directionless kind of like, my security is breached and now I'm paranoid and anxious. Or if we have too many boundaries and we're not helping people enough, then we all of a sudden are cold and heartless and we've isolated ourselves and now we can't fulfill our purpose. So truly, discrimination is very important, and this healthy balance is very, very important. So this episode is miles long, and I'm so sorry for that. Before we end, though, I just want to nab at one more thing. And I think this is one of the most popular jabs Virgo will get, which is perfectionism. And truly, I just think this is best tackled with a quote by Liz Green. She says, "It has been suggested that perfectionism is a Virgo characteristic. I haven't found this to be the case. Discrimination? Yes, absolutely. No one is more discriminating than Virgo. A simple yes or simple no doesn't work. It has to be a yes to this part and possibly to that part and probably no to that middle one unless A and B can be changed, and certainly no to the last. Never black and white. Black and white choices imply a simple universe, and to Virgo, the universe is rarely simple. It's more like a huge, boundless jigsaw puzzle, and it drives Virgo crazy if he hasn't got a picture of the puzzle on the top of the box before he begins to assemble the puzzle. Discrimination is a finely developed faculty with Virgo." As Liz Green breaks down, to be a perfectionist, one must have an ideal of what perfect is, how it looks, and all those details. Ultimately, though, this would imply an idealistic person. But as Liz Green argues, Virgos are not typically ideal. They are so focused on reality. And Liz Green bounces between saying that they are arguably the most realistic sign of the zodiac in the tangible sense. Remember that they focus on whatever is before them. They are the people that, when asked if the glass is half empty or half full, they will just take one glance and fill it up or just drink it. There's no philosophical dimension behind it. Virgo accepts whatever stands before them. They are reliant on it. And as Liz Green says, no perfectionist has ever accepted reality. Perfectionists are caught up into what things should look like or could look like. They never focus on what things actually look like, or they never even embrace it. But Virgos are so realistic. They accept the reality. They understand that they can get more work done by just handling what is presently in front of them than sitting and dreaming off in some corner. They don't need to wonder. They don't need to sit there and dream. They already know they need to assist in some way, and so they're doing it. We must also consider what our definition of perfection is. If the definition of perfection is that things are in working order, then we can call Virgo a perfectionist, right? They strive to correct, they strive to refine. And instead of perfectionism, I actually prefer something that Tony Howard says in his lecture. He says that Virgos purify things, and I love that. They don't perfect them, they purify them. And with all that said, that is a wrap. I'm hoping this made sense. There's a ton of information in this episode, and I'm really hoping it just didn't come out too confusing. What's important is that we understand that Virgo's ultimate goal is to cultivate the self, not perfect the self, but develop the self, so that they can then truly be of service to others and genuinely provide the gentle influences of purification and synthesization to others. I really hope this episode has impacted you enough to question your own understanding of Virgo. Again, this episode was built with the learnings, quotes, references from the brilliant astrological minds and books, Catherine Hammaker-Zondag's Psychological Astrology, and her book Planetary Symbolism in the Horoscope, Liz Green's Astrology for Lovers, Frank C. Clifford's Getting to the Heart of Your Chart, Darby Costello's Earth and Air, Stephen Forrest, The Inner Sky, and Tony Howard, a lecture on the zodiac signs. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. I'm so happy I did this under an hour. Woo! Thanks. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to head over to wildflowersinthesky.com, and we will happily talk to you there.